What's up, people? We will be joined shortly by a buddy of mine in California. His name is Jacob Lyles. You might or may not know who he is. I don't think he keeps a very high profile, but he does have a podcast and he's engaged on Twitter and stuff like that. But he's mostly just someone I met in California when I was there, and we just wanted to catch up, talk about some things in a way that felt like worthy of just throwing on the air. It's much earlier there in California right now, so he's having his morning coffee. I told him not to rush and to join us whenever he's ready. Let me make sure this is all right. My sleep schedule is so screwed up. Well, I guess to a normal person it's screwed up, but to me, it's pretty awesome. It's basically I'm doing free running sleep, I guess what they call it, which basically means you go to sleep whenever you're tired and you wake up whenever you're awake. All right, how's that? That's good. So yeah, it's like 5:13 p.m. here, and I just woke up like 2 hours ago, 3 hours ago maybe. Joseph Autumn, who says in the chat, "Attention, Fortnite players. Justin Murphy needs your help." What do you have? What are you talking about? I don't know. What help could I need from Fortnite players? I've looked at videos of Fortnite. I've never played I don't play any video games. I haven't played video games in years. Well, maybe once or twice, like at a friend's house, but I haven't like actually played any of the new video games in the past few years with any amount of seriousness. But I've looked at them, and I have to admit they do look pretty dope. Like I'm kind of tempted to get into video games, especially because like right now, when my life is sort of like in this suspended state, I could totally play mad video games right now and get away with it in terms of my life prospects. And it looks fun. They look really fun. Even just watching the videos, I'm kind of like, I could definitely see the attraction of this. And yeah, so, but I don't know. I kind of like seeing reality as a game. I kind of like seeing real life as a video game. When you see it that way, it's more fun. And it kind of takes the edge off of it all. Man, Tales of Ruin coming through with the major questions while I'm still hydrating myself for the morning. Would I rather live in the cathedral democratic status quo or a neo-cameralist patch? Well, my friend, that all depends on the nature of the neo-cameralist patch. I think there are good debates being had about what that should look like, what would work, what wouldn't work, and whether it would be desirable or not. For instance, the vision that I've put forward speculatively, it's not at all worked out. It's not. In theory, I think there's something there that could work. But as people have pointed out, I mean, there are many ways it could go wrong. I would not too eagerly subscribe to any neo-cameralist patch unless I was convinced that the engineering diagram was sound and that it wouldn't have really malignant failure modes. And a lot of the early efforts probably would. And here we are, joined by Mr. Jacob himself. How are you doing? Can you hear me okay?
Good morning, Justin. I can hear you fine. Can you hear me okay?
Hang on. You're kind of soft to me. That might be my fault, though. Hang on.
No, I can. I have mic gain I can adjust. You sound great.
Okay. Yeah, you sound good to me, too. People in the chat will tell us if one of us is way too loud or too soft.
Can I see the chat, too?
Oh, yeah, you can. You just have to go to the go to the YouTube page and pop it out there. I would actually, depending on your psychology, depending on your temperament, I sometimes would encourage people to not bother with it because it can, if you're not used to it, it can be really distracting. And sometimes, like if there are trolls in the chat that I can't control that, it can sometimes like really psych people out.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think I'm ready for anybody to dislike me or to say mean things about me. So I'm going to skip that.
Great. Yeah, that's exactly why I would warn you. But I'm monitoring it for any like good questions or comments of value that I'll bring up if necessary or attractive.
Cool. Yeah, kind of early here for me. I'm getting booted up still a little bit.
Yeah, that's cool. We can boot up together. I mean, I was just telling them that I have a kind of crazy schedule right now because since I'm not, how should I say, since my responsibilities have been quite suddenly alleviated, I get to
Living the dream, Justin.
I'm basically living the dream. Yeah. So I get to do what's my favorite kind of sleep system, which is what they call free running sleep, which basically just means you go to sleep whenever you're tired and you wake up whenever your body wants to. It's the absolute
That's not,
best way to organize sleep for me personally. I love when I have the privilege of living this way. Obviously, it's not practical for most people, but that's what I'm on right now. But it leads to crazy kind of outcomes where like one day you might be today I woke up around like 2 p.m. and I'll be up until like 5 a.m. tonight. So yeah, it's kind of difficult, but it's you feel always like well rested.
that sounds really responsible of you,
Well,
Justin.
yeah, well, it is responsible because
Are you
I'm
are you
very
drinking
productive.
water out of a protein shaker without? Is that a
Yeah,
protein shaker?
it's water in a protein shaker cup.
Yeah. I just I had this opinion of you maybe being more classy than that. But
Yeah, well,
maybe
don't yeah, I mean this lovely classical kind of background that I have is just to compensate for my actual slovenliness.
it has a certain aesthetic.
Well, I don't know. I think my aesthetic is I mean I clean up fairly well. Like I can be professional and cleaned up and I do like kind of high art and stuff like that and I like well put together environments and everything like that and I can do it, but um my default average is like pretty normal, I guess. Like I'm not too sloppy or disorganized or dirty, but um yeah, I think I'm probably like pretty average.
Hmm. I'm rocking a fizzy water today, an off-brand fizzy water, non LaCroix.
Oh
Um,
yeah, we don't have that here, but everyone talks about it.
it's like the thing in Silicon Valley, especially because we're like all too smart to drink corn syrup, but we like fizzy things because humans love fizzy things.
Yeah.
So they invented um, fizzy water with like ghosts of flavor in it. It's like a pineapple died and its ghost is haunting the water. It's kind of the flavor.
Nice. Yeah, I want to try LaCroix, but they don't have it here, so I can't be in the cool club.
Oh, I'll ship one to you, Justin.
Thanks, dude.
How much can it cost? Like $20? It's worth it for you to do a LaCroix review on your stream.
Okay, I'll think about that for future content. So you just said something that I thought was interesting. You said Silicon Valley, and then you said we. So for people who, that's a nice kind of segue to maybe share with people a little bit about who you are or whatever, because I mentioned before you joined that you're out in the Bay Area. But I haven't known you that long, and I wouldn't have necessarily thought that you necessarily identify as a representative of Silicon Valley. So that's kind of, or a participant in Silicon Valley proper. So maybe you could, by way of clarifying that, you could just also for a larger audience, just maybe tell us all a little bit about your story or how you see yourself in that way.
Yeah, I feel a little exasperated listening to that because the truth of the matter is that I'm a big skeptic of Silicon Valley and like I feel like a cultural dissident and a contrarian. And there's nothing more Silicon Valley than being a cultural dissident and a contrarian and like not identifying with it. Um, so, I mean, I've been in the Bay Area for 8 years, came up here to do a startup and then worked at several other startups. Now I'm sort of in the Bitcoin space and working with a startup there. Um, and so I mean, I'm definitely Silicon Valley. And maybe like the ways that Silicon Valley has drifted from like what I expected the culture to be or what it was back when I was getting started. Maybe that's um, part of my disidentification with it. Like I feel like there's some more pure version of nerd culture that deserves to have a physical manifestation in the real world. Maybe that's an illusion. I don't know.
Right.
But
So remind us, when did you first go to Silicon Valley, or the Bay Area, whatever, more generally? Like when did that moment kind of start for you?
I started living here in 2010. And so the other thing that might be pertinent to your viewers, besides my technical background, like I know something about bitcoins and blockchains and things like that and cryptography. I care about privacy a lot. I wouldn't call myself a cypherpunk because I don't have enough OG street cred for that, but I sort of hang out around it. I used to be, like, sort of still am, but very occasionally. I was a libertarian blogger back in the day. I got linked to by Reason Magazine. Robin Hanson retweeted something I wrote lately. But I've definitely been dialing that back. I write a lot less and my quality is higher. And if you go to my blog and read something, you're like, the quality of this sucks. Well, it used to be even lower than that. But I dialed that back a lot. And I think there's two reasons for that. One is that in hanging out in the crypto space, there's sort of this unspoken implicit norm against politics. So I have like a couple of crypto guys that I really like following me on Twitter, and if I started tweeting about politics, I'd lose them. And it's kind of fun that Nick Szabo and Zuko and Naval like listen to what I have to say, and like, do I want to lose that to like gain some audience of probably lower quality people if I started tweeting about politics? So like the Twitter crypto space is kind of like has this like social norm that's like driving me away from politics.
Interesting.
And the other thing was in 2013, like was sort of, I feel like a watershed moment for sort of this the social justice mob, where like Brendan Knight got fired in 2013, and I was writing some sort of immigration skeptic post on my blog, and a friend of mine emailed me and he's like, "Are you sure you want to be writing that?" And I thought, no, I'm not sure that I want to be writing that. And so I sort of dialed back some political things then I just started recently sort of like dipping my toe back in the water. Like I've interacted with enough social justice activists in person that I think I know the lingo. I think I can swim with the alligators and not get eaten. And I think it's important for people to like my biggest criticism of the left is that they don't understand their opponents, and there's sort of a understanding. I remember reading a Sam Altman piece where he was defending his decision not to kick Peter Thiel off the advisory board of Y Combinator, I think, and he was saying, "I don't understand why anyone could ever vote for Trump, but we need to be kind to Trump voters." And I'm like, you're a smart guy, Sam. Like, are you can't understand why anybody could vote for Trump? I mean, they're writing about it on the internet and they're speaking about it. So my biggest criticism of the left is like this sort of purposeful ignorance. But there's not like that many people putting out like a good case for heterodox ideas. Like Jordan Peterson's doing it. But not that many other people are. And I think there is a duty for people that think differently to actually put their ideas out there, like even if there's consequences, even if it's dangerous.
So definitely. I think that's well put. I mean, one thing I would add to that, or one additional layer that I see, is I think that, we could sooner than later find ourselves in a really serious problem where all of this political polarization is really sort of moving towards like civil war level proportions. And my view is that like we're not quite there yet. And so if we are to make sure that we don't get there, what is really required of everyone is to just just say what you think honestly, say what you feel honestly, if nothing else, to the people around you or to whatever larger audience you know have the comfort to go to and the resources to muster. If everyone just kind of like says the truth of what they think and feel, what you'll actually find is this kind of like multi-dimensional splintering, which I think is also kind of ongoing, right? Like you see traces of that happening right now too. And so to me, it's like there's a race going on right now between the polarization, civil war vector, and then the multi-dimensional fractioning or fracturing that's going on right now. And I think like this is just an additional way of seeing what you were just describing. Like I also think it's a real ethical responsibility for everyone to throw their weight behind the, if you have to choose, the multidimensional fracturing over the massifying polarization.
Yeah, there's sort of a war for public space going on,
Mm-hmm.
and there's two ways that can go. One is we all agree on some sort of meta ethic that allows each different group of ethical people to like have their own space. Like liberalism is sort of a meta ethic, right? Like it says, like Scott Alexander's Archipelago is this vision of which I think knows like lots of libertarian thinkers have this utopia, which is basically it's really easy to set up your own society and exit's really easy, but other people can't interfere in your society. So it's like this splintering sort of a vision of it's this vision of human heterogeneity, and like the real utopia is a meta utopia, and on the other hand, it's possible to just try to dominate the public space if you think you can get away with it, if you have enough people behind you, and really that battleground today is in Silicon Valley. It's really a technological thing that's being waged and a social thing. So
right. So you got to the Bay Area around 2010, and you were describing that there were kind of early appearances of the kind of culture war that we're now, I think very clearly immersed in, taking place on your radar as early as like 2013. I think you referred to before. Is that right?
I think it was earlier than that you could see glimmers of it.
Sure.
But it's really, that was a really high profile scalp that the left took in 2013. They're saying like this is Silicon Valley is not a multicultural space; it is a left space. That was kind of the message that was sent by that, and I think that's like overstating it a little bit. Like Brendan Eich was he was a C-level executive at a progressive company, so like there's plenty of rank and file Republicans, probably like 10% of the Valley's Republican or something like that. Or maybe a little less, but it's not 1%, and most people get along, but that was just it kind of, you could feel that something was going on in 2013.
Right. Okay. And so, in your experience there, how has it evolved from what you've been able to see?
Well, I actually stopped working at a big company in 2015, and I haven't been back to like a big company kind of environment.
What was the big company you worked for again?
Wasn't that big. I was working at Coursera.
Oh, that's pretty big. I mean, everyone will have heard of that, so that's pretty big, I'd say.
It was 200 people. Yeah, I don't know that it's, I don't want to overstate things. Like I don't have that much vision into what's going on. Like I see the same news stories you guys see. Like the James Damore firing was kind of big on the radar in 2017. Was that 2016?
Maybe.
How long has it been since?
I forget. 2016 or 17. Not that long ago.
James got canned. But that so one topic I want to talk with you about is I feel like I've been drifting towards the center or towards leftward, certainly from where I started over the last few years.
Okay, that's interesting.
I do want to talk about that. Um,
So you said
but
when you moved into Silicon Valley, you were quite kind of standard libertarian.
yeah, and then I think there was both push and pull that kind of made me drift right. And the push is I really care about epistemic freedom.
Hmm.
Um, like I grew up in a religious cult where information was carefully restricted, and the way that they wanted to build um, sort of support for their religious platform was just keeping you from viewing material from any other religion or any criticisms of the religion.
Hmm.
And that's like my foundational trauma. Like that's my childhood trauma that like drives my life. When I read Ayn Rand in college and she had this story about like fleeing communist Russia, I'm like, oh, she's one of me. Like, like the
Uh-huh.
communist dissidents, they were like that really spoke to me. And I hate like anybody that's telling me I can't think something, can't say something, can't discuss something. Like it's really it makes me feel like that helpless child again.
Right. So I
And
wasn't sure if you wanted to talk about this, but since you brought it up, we shouldn't just pass over it so quickly. It's a pretty profound thing. Do you want to just give us the TLDR on your cult experience?
well, I mean, I just grew up in Jehovah's Witnesses, so
Right.
they're not allowed to have friends outside the faith, do anything that would expose them to children outside the faith unnecessarily. So we weren't allowed to play sports or do after school activities or have friends that weren't Jehovah's Witnesses. They strongly advise against going to college because that's just hanging out with lots of non Jehovah's Witnesses. And they're not allowed to read religious material from other faiths, and
Right.
they're not really allowed to question. Uh, every question has an official answer from the central organization, and that's your answer.
Right. And so then you came across libertarianism and you were like, this is awesome.
Natural fit, right?
Yeah. So you escaped the cult, moved to libertarianism. And when you moved into Silicon Valley, you kind of come in with this libertarian perspective. And then you said you initially moved further to the right. And what was that all
Yeah,
about?
I think, man, the left. There's a push, which is like just seeing the left sort of like speak power to truth, like use social shaming, ostracism, um, to get their way. It's like we're not going to engage with your arguments. We're just going to make you lose your job. And every time I saw that, or if I feel in fear of that, like I just hate that, hate it. Like there's nothing I hate more.
Yeah.
And so I probably got pushed, further anti-left than I should be. Um,
Okay.
like now I'm in a process of like self-criticism and self-reflection and saying like what's good about the left. Um, and I do want to get to that because I have a something I've been thinking about. I haven't said it out loud. Something I've been about that I think interesting about what's pulling me back towards the center. Um, but that's the push.
So
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 that
go
made me
for it
more.
then. Go for it now. So tell us what made you
Well,
move back to the left then, or what's the main point that's on your mind?
there's like four influences I think that are driving me further to the center.
Okay, fascinating.
One is uh, you're one of them.
Oh wow.
Justin Murphy is one of them.
Oh, you're too kind.
Nick Land is one of them.
Huh, pushing you to the left.
Um,
Not many people would say that.
yeah,
Okay.
he's a fantastic left wing thinker. Um, Donald Trump and Jordan Peterson.
They've all pushed you to the left. I think
Yeah.
I might be able to see where you're going, but I want to. I'm very curious to break it down for us.
And in addition to all those things, there's just the experience of, I socialize with left wing people all day, every day. Everything I do is with left wing people. If someone's politically active, I'm in Berkeley, California. Um, it is with left wing people. So I've learned the lingo. I've been interacting with them. But first of all, like my biggest problem with the left is epistemic closure. And you don't have that. Like you've read Moldbug, you've read Nick Land, you talk about it. You have you know, when I was reading your writing initially, I'm just like, this is an open-minded leftist. Like I never, you can't make me left by threatening me.
Right.
And people like me, like I guess libertarian-ish people that are now in this post-libertarian landscape where we have all these ideologies sort of bubbling up, like this Cambrian explosion going on. Like you can't get us on your side by threatening us. Can't work. But you were an open-minded leftist and
Thank you.
like self-described communist. And that was curious to me, and it made me think like I could engage with your writing without it being aggressive towards me. And then you brought in a lot of ideas from Nick Land. Nick Land is, I think, really, once you understand accelerationism, he really flips the left-right axis on just, it's entirely orthogonal. So as a libertarian, I grew up like extremely pro-capitalist, like 100% pro-capitalist. I would make fun of environmentalists. I would really like I was obnoxious. Okay, just obnoxiously pro-capitalist. I'm like all prosperity depends on capitalism, and if you don't agree with that, you're stupid. And then Nick Land has this conceptual framework where like capitalism is actually like this process that's made of humans but not run by humans, and it doesn't really care about you. It doesn't not care about you, but it doesn't really care about you. And just the description that he had, it just rang true. It really seemed like human value and capitalism are orthogonal. They're not either correlated or anti-correlated significantly. Maybe they, maybe they're somewhat correlated, but in the future they could be really anti-correlated. And so that opens me up to like critiques of capitalism, and the idea that like humans left in perfect freedom might drift into attractor states that are really distasteful to the kind of values I believe in. So, I mean, isn't Nick Land like a perfect left blue pill for libertarians?
So I want to pause on that, and then you tell me more about your other factors pushing your perspective, because I think what you said is very fascinating. You do not hear many people today saying that the current version of Nick Land is pushing them leftward. But I've always really thought that there is a strange kind of four-dimensional chess going on in his larger project, because, as I talked to him about, he starts off in a pretty, explicitly, or pretty clearly, not so much explicitly, but at least clearly kind of left-wing perspective in his early writings. And then he, in his recent shift he's become like an almost over the top caricature of right-wing evil. It's like he plays up kind of a certain performance of just a right-wing evil. And I've always kind of saw in that something a little bit deeper and trickier, and with a nonlinear kind of counterintuitive political logic to it. I'm not saying that, it's just fake performance art. He's actually an undercover leftist trying to shift the world towards leftism through a kind of over the top evil representation of the right. But I think I've always wondered if there's a little bit of that kind of logic to what he's doing, in the sense that the way that I see it is sort of like, if you are really opposed to capitalism, what better way to make the world see what's horrible about capitalism than to embody a kind of representative or defender of capitalism in the kind of most extreme, irritating, offensive, provocative, evil guise you possibly can. So it's like, his whole kind of playing up the coldness and brutality, kind of building a whole aesthetics of brutality, really, that is aligned with the acceleration of techno capital. You can kind of see it as this kind of like deep play that should actually be making people more and more uncomfortable with capitalism. And in that way, it could have a weirdly kind of left-wing implication in terms of its effects on how people think about capitalism. And it sounds like you're kind of testifying to be an example of that, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know very many people that read Nick and are like, yes, I agree with this guy. Like something deeply unattractive about like his stance that if humans can be replaced, they ought to be replaced. If human value can be eliminated, it ought to be eliminated. Like he's backing whatever horse is most powerful, and that's it. Like techno capital deserves to escape us and to consume us, if it can. That's sort of his position, right?
I mean, I think it's complicated, but I think that's a perfectly reasonable takeaway. Sure.
But I think I don't quite understand Nick Land that well. I don't have a deep philosophical background. I'm not as smart as you, Justin.
I'm sure that you are.
No. But I do think he kind of like takes the political spectrum and puts it on LSD. Like I don't quite, it's not the same after you get familiar with his thoughts.
Right.
Like, suddenly anti-capitalism is the conservative position.
That's right.
That's anti-capitalism becomes right-wing, and pro-capitalism is this wildly progressive, or it's the change driven perspective. Like if you like it's like, whoa, that is the inversion of the spectrum.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think he's really helped me also kind of refine my understanding of certain things in the world, such as he's really helped me see how truly and deeply kind of like progressive moralistic protest against capitalism is absolutely, it's like a capitalist firm, basically. It's people seeking to exploit other people for their own profit, basically. Like all of like traditional moralistic progressive protest, that entire tradition, arguably including Marx, it's basically a kind of sublimated form of cultural capitalism. It's people thinking strategically and instrumentally about how they can exploit public symbols and push people's buttons to get the rewards that they want to get for themselves at the expense of other people. I thoroughly see all of modern protest activity as essentially this kind of even more insidious capitalism, essentially. That's essentially doing that. And I find like an honest and straightforward kind of radical right winger to be far more I actually find an honest radical right winger I find way less ethically problematic than the kind of deep symbolic treachery that modern leftism is in its relationship to capitalism. Are you thinking, or did we break up?
I'm thinking. I'm actually not thinking. I'm just sitting here in silence.
No, that's cool.
I had no response to that.
It's good. I appreciate people who are comfortable with long pauses. I was just making sure the computer didn't break down.
I can do a good job simulating a crashed computer.
So, would you want to carry on with your the other factors, because they're interesting?
Sure. Jordan Peterson's an interesting one.
Again, not someone many people would think of as pushing anyone to the left.
Well, I had this feeling maybe 2016, maybe 2015, that like cultural institutions had just been captured by this narrow-minded sort of strident leftist ideology, and like the only solution was to replace them, work around them, destroy them. Like I was very opposed to like sort of mainstream cultural institutions, like universities. I felt like were gradually becoming dominated by left-wing thought and going unchallenged. And I would read people on the internet that I think it was possible to challenge these positions, but it didn't seem like within the institutions, like they were being challenged, at least not successfully. You had like the Christakises being persecuted at Yale, and the Weinstein guy, and you had Charles Murray getting mobbed, and you had all this stuff going on, and I'm like, okay, this institution that has been the source of wisdom and knowledge being passed down, and that has trained our elite for several hundred years. I mean, it's trained the first Western university was like founded in like 1100, right? I think Oxford's like 1100, and it was primarily trained clergy. So you have this long storied institution that just looks corrupt, and it's sad, but maybe we just need to move on. And I was probably the most radical person working at Coursera. Like, I worked there because like I wanted to disintermediate and then destroy the university. But then Jordan Peterson comes around and he speaks his mind, and people try to kill his career, but they don't kill him. Like he's critiquing the left-wing project from within the institution, and he's not destroyed. And that made me think, maybe I don't need to be as afraid as I was. And like, and there is space. And Jonathan Haidt's another one. He's kind of critiquing from more of a moderate position, but he's also calling for people who understand right-wing arguments. I wouldn't call myself right-wing per se, but I'm like, I think the biggest difference I would notice between myself and people of the left is that I understand right-wing arguments. But I think there is a call for people that understand right-wing arguments, that if they're any good, to go and be part of the institutions. Like, go be a psychology professor, go be a social psychologist.
Right. So you're kind of saying that the rise of Jordan Peterson made you feel like you don't have to be a kind of hardcore radical right winger to stave off the problems of what's happening. That actually he kind of increased your confidence in the possibility that mainstream institutions could be saved, and therefore you didn't have to be as polarized or radical on the right as you might have been otherwise.
Yeah, and I don't want to call myself. I want to make sure that the label radical right winger doesn't get applied to me out there.
Okay. Did I say that?
Well, yeah. But it's just kind of, I'm just minding my optics.
No, I think I said it as a counterfactual. Like I said, Jordan Peterson was one of the factors that stopped you from possibly becoming a more kind of radical right winger. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair to say. I think it's just this idea that like I believe that the right thing to do is engagement. And I think he's doing the right thing. And he's been treated unfairly in a lot of cases, but he's also like a cultural icon now.
Oh yeah.
Like he's surviving, and I think he's having a big influence.
Oh yeah, way more than survive. I think you're absolutely right on that. He's way more than surviving. He's like way better off and more powerful and more effective in everything, in every possible way, than he was before the conflict started.
Yeah. So I think he's a voice just saying that, like, he's showing by example that the institutions are not completely corrupt.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. So, okay, so that makes sense to me. Do you want to now explain what other people will also find puzzling, which is that Donald Trump pushed you to the left?
Yeah, I think he has stretched the Overton window.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you hear more heterodoxy maybe coming out in sort of less ideological media
than
you
agree.
did 3 years ago. Like maybe the high watermark of sort of constrained political thinking. Maybe we're the dam is broken, and or the snow is melting, and a more liberal ideological conversation can be had in public now. And I think, like Donald Trump himself, I think he pushed the Overton window wider. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would maybe chime in with a thought here, which is that in the way that I've seen things play out, it looks to me like Trump definitely has opened up the Overton window in the larger public culture as a whole. But I think quite interestingly and very revealingly, Trump has not opened up the Overton window in establishment outlets,
Hmm.
at least not yet, because I think you've actually seen active doubling down on SJWism after Trump. I think there have been some really telling instances of this. Like I pay attention to this stuff very closely right now, especially because I am actually writing a book about this as we speak. But if you look at, for instance, The Atlantic, when they tried to hire Kevin Williamson, did you follow that episode?
Yeah, I did.
So Kevin Williamson, conservative columnist, anti-abortion, this sort of guy. The Atlantic made it. They wanted to hire him, and some people at the Atlantic, I guess some sort of majority, took the initiative to decide to hire Kevin Williamson, and I think people rightly interpret it as a kind of active effort among establishment, cultural elites to, hey, we have to open up a little bit more to right wing people, because that's the only way to prevent catastrophes such as Trump. Is that's how I interpret it. I think that's a lot of how people interpret it. I think even they might have said something to this effect about how they wanted to actively kind of like welcome on more intelligent conservatives a little bit more actively than they might have. Um, at least that's how I read it. And then, due to popular protest, they were forced to back down and not hire Kevin Williamson, and they basically just caved to, to consumer demand, which makes sense. They're a business, right? Like they have to worry about what their paying audience is going to accept and not accept. So I thought that was one episode that was very revealing, and it kind of showed to me like even if cultural leftist elites kind of see the problem and they want to um, kind of be better about it and let in intelligent conservative voices, they're going to be not allowed to do that by the nature of their audience, their consumer base. And then
Not allowed.
yeah, well, not allowed. I mean, they are disciplined by the market, right? By their market, right? So I see this as a kind of
It's not like their traffic numbers crashed after they hired Kevin Williamson. It's they got a few mean tweets.
Well, that's a good question, Jacob. And if you're so you can have reasonable debates about this, like the business aspect. Like if you're right, then there will be arbitrage opportunities, right? So there
Mhm.
will be emerging kind of establishment leftist institutions that do have way more openness to conservatives, and those, if you're right, then those should rise eventually, and the Atlantic will go by the wayside.
Oh,
But
who's the editor at the Atlantic?
oh, I don't know.
I forgot his name.
But
Um,
another possibility is that you're wrong, and that actually the current kind of culturally elite institutions and outlets are actually, they have their finger on the pulse correctly. And if the Atlantic tried to hire Kevin Williamson, it actually would not be sustainable given who their audience is in the culture wars. And so anyway, I took that I took that as very revealing. And then I found it especially revealing when you had the case of Sarah Zhang at the New York Times, right? Because it's kind of a very similar episode in terms of a controversial hire at a mainstream elite uh, outlet, and everything went in the absolute opposite direction, right? There was massive protest about the outrageous things that she's written and the offensive things that she's said, and the New York Times doubled down and said, no, we can tolerate this, we accept her. So those two episodes back to back were kind of strongly influenced my model of the world, to be honest, because that said to me, okay, the mainstream elite cultural institutions are kind of structurally prohibited from averting the course that they're on, and I interpret that to mean that they're kind of on a death spiral that they can't even get themselves out of. But maybe you see it differently.
no, I think that I probably need to make my model a little bit more sophisticated here, which is something like maybe the thing that comes to mind is maybe the mainstream institutions with the big names like New York Times and Atlantic are like pop music, and they're becoming more and more homogenized. And there's less variety in pop music today than there was 50 years ago or 40 years ago. Um, and but maybe the market is opening up more for independent acts.
Right. Well, that's where I think the Overton window is opening up. It's in the larger culture. It's in the wild explosion of the long tail, really. It's all of the
Mhm.
independent creative people making stuff on the internet. I mean, that is definitely where things have opened up. But to me, that's on a vector away from the mainstream institutions course correcting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're probably right. So the the thing that I've noticed that is really um I think controlling these mainstream institutions is that like very neutral corporations that pay the advertising dollars like seem to be aligning left,
Hmm.
like or seem to be willing to cave to a left-wing mob but not a right-wing mob.
Hmm.
um so if a bunch of right-wingers get angry about the New York Times hiring Sarah Jeong, like there's they're not going to lose any advertisers, but
Right.
um like the Atlantic might have been worried about advertisers, and
Right.
we see advertisers putting pressures on media companies about like right wing deviation or politically incorrect statements from people that write for them. Like those are that's when you get in trouble. Like the whole adpocalypse on YouTube was part of that. Um, so that might be there is this like elite culture that seems to connect. Well, Moldbug calls it the cathedral, right? Like this idea, like there's a cultural insularity among uh, people in media and high up in government and education and higher education. And the thing that might be new is that it's bleeding out into previously kind of neutral corporate world, like Mastercard or Bank of America, or like I think was it Bank of America canceling bank accounts of like gun manufacturers.
Okay.
Um,
I don't know.
there was some bank that was saying like, oh, if you make guns, you can't bank here anymore. After one of the school shootings, and so like you see like very previously neutral institutions taking sides, and that's part of um, the spike in the culture wars, and remains seen how long these platforms that are allowing the long tail to activate, like your show on YouTube, um, like how long like they will be willing to distribute that long tail under pressure from advertisers. Um,
Right. Right. Do you think it has something to do with like who is the market for kind of like highbrow institutional culture? Like, because I think that that's kind of my read is that the advertisers care more about violations of left wing rules because the people who read those things and pay for those services tend to be kind of institutionalized, respectable people.
I think it's like the Whole Foods model going across the whole economy. Like people shop at Whole Foods to feel good about themselves.
Hmm.
Uh, like they get ethically sourced meat and and organic produce, and like not only do you get food, but you get to like be absolved of some sins and like earn virtue. Um,
So you think there's
and
something about leftism that is kind of like um, it's kind of like a natural social bias towards that which kind of like helps people feel good about themselves. Is that kind of like your model?
I don't know that I want to go so far as saying that's my model. I'm coming up with this on the fly. This is improv, Justin.
No, I know.
Um,
I'm just saying your model at this point in time in your mind.
it's something like, well, I think the thing that annoys me is maybe I just like maybe it's just like when very political, like adversarial kinds of issues become the way that corporations allow you to signal um, your virtue. Um, it's like it has it becomes a zero sum game where it feels to me like Whole Foods is not a zero sum game. Like nobody's being hurt by the fact that you feel better about yourself for buying organic. Um, but if a corporation's like aligning themselves like against gun rights, now they are allowing you to pick a side in the culture war because they think that side is more motivated or more elite, or
Right.
I'm not sure, or maybe they just is. I think a lot of this is not um, is not a reflection of like calculated
Yeah,
benefit. It's just
I agree.
the CEO shares the culture uh, of the left. Like they're educated. They went to school a lot. They hang out with other people who are educated.
Right, right. Right. I tend towards those models also where it's like mostly people are following very simple local rules. You know, like the people most people are following simple heuristics. There's very rarely ever kind of like grand strategic calculations about these sorts of things. So I incline towards that view also. We should talk also a little about because I told you that this will be a relatively short one today because I got to run to training, but we do still have a good chunk of time. We have about 15 minutes before I have to run. I think we should try to get to some discussion about religion because something
Oh
I think
yeah,
you and I both have
that
in
sounds
common
great.
is that we've both um, in recent years, I think, become far more interested in religion. So maybe could you tell us in your own words how that's looked for you?
Yeah. How are we doing, by the way? Do you think this is a decent live stream?
Oh yeah, it's great. It's fine. I
Okay,
mean,
cool.
you know me, like my whole shtick is I don't do things for instrumental purposes so much as, I'm just I do things that
You're
I want to
authentic.
do, and if it becomes like consumable for other people later is quite beside the point. It's good if that happens, and if it doesn't, it's quite beside the point. So you and I are just talking, and I'm enjoying it. So it's good as far as I can tell.
Good. I have like some anxiety around being probably like your least well-known live stream guest.
No, but that's what I'm into, man. This is what I'm into. Like I don't think the whole magic and beauty of this long tail is that you can just do what you want and you don't have to make everything a calculation about like, oh, I have to have the right people or influential people only. Like, no, I'm trying to I do this stuff because I'm interested in talking with the people I'm interested in. And I think that when people take the wager to just live their life that way, they get amazing things happen through like weird accidents and it ends up working out better that way. I think people are like suffocating themselves even in these types of calculations about like strategic uh considerations around like who they should talk to and when. Like my whole thing is I'm trying to um blow all of that up in one grand gesture with my life.
You're the Kanye West of political science.
Not yet, but that would be I would be very proud of that designation if I were one day to earn that.
Well, he just is the poster child for like authenticity nowadays. Um,
I think he's pretty high level woke. What do you think?
oh, I think he's based.
Based based, yeah. Based and red pilled or just based?
Just based. Well, I think there's like this base to woke axis. Like you could redraw the political quadrant of like based to woke, and then like maybe like lulls to try hard or something. And
That's good.
that could be like your four quadrants
That's
of
good.
like
I would like to
based
see
in try hard, based in lulls, woke in lulls, woke in try hard.
That's intriguing. I would like to see someone try to formalize that.
You would be probably like between based and woke, like right on that axis, and then somewhere like mildly into the lulls side of the thing.
And what's the opposite of lulls, did you say?
Try hard,
Okay. Interesting.
like
Well, we'll leave that to an
yeah,
enterprising person in the audience to formalize that. I think it's a promising lead. But in the 10 minutes while I still have you, let's try to talk about tell
yeah,
us about your attitudes towards religion because this is something you and I have chatted about privately. So go for it.
yeah. I talked about my religious upbringing,
Hmm.
which was a push into extreme atheism, kind of in my young adult years. But I guess I have a bit of a mystical side. Like I have a lot of religious feeling. Like I have very strong emotions. I'm very easily taken away by beauty, um, and I'm capable of feeling great love for people and things. And when I started encountering more mainstream Christianity in college and afterwards, like it it wasn't as dumb and closed minded as Jehovah's Witnesses was. Like it was just far better than I thought it would be. Um, but so there's been this very slow process over the next. I mean, I'm old. I'm 35. So I graduated from college when I was 22, 13 years. I've explored a lot of Buddhism. I may or may not have taken some psychedelics during that time. And I've been like going to church on Christmas and Easter. And those are sort of the three main religious experiences that I may or may not have pursued. And um, and I think probably Jordan Peterson like gave me, well, my mind was already prepared by being more phenomenologically focused.
Hmm.
Like at some point, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, like I stopped seeing myself as a collection of atoms and more as like the thing that experiences reality. Um, so my view of like what it means to be human has changed from the objective to the subjective, um, which really pisses people off. Like most of my friends are were scientific materialists and objectivists. I mean, rationalists, not objectivists. There's no objectivists that are worth anything um, being friends with, but plenty of rationalists that are worth being friends with. Um, and but I started just like viewing the world through a more subjective lens. And when you view the world subjectively, like there's magic. Like you can change the very fundamental um, nature of reality through how you relate to people and what emotions you bring to your experience of reality. Like if you approach the world with reverence and wonder, like that's a very different feeling than approaching the world through like how can I be most productive kind of mind frame.
Hmm.
And so with that sort of preparation, um, Jordan Peterson's biblical lectures are sort of a phenomenological, psychological interpretation of the Book of Genesis. They're wonderful. Have you listened to them?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay, yeah. Not everybody. I mean, it's 36 hours worth of content, so not everybody's done it. But I listened to the first one. I'm like, I have to. I mean, I couldn't stop myself from listening to the rest.
Yeah, they're definitely worth
Yeah.
listening to if you're at all interested in Christianity. I think especially for, this is why people love to hate on Jordan Peterson, but there's a reason why he's blown up. And I think it's like people like you and I are, I don't consider myself a fanboy because, I'm trying to constitute myself as a kind of potential like peer of, the people I admire, you know what I mean? So I don't fanboy or anything like that. I think there's lots to critique, for sure. But obviously as a young man, kind of like floating in a generally kind of postmodern, like leftist milieu for most of my young adult life. Um, Jordan Peterson is obviously just the current master of articulating why that stuff is like psychologically quite harmful for many people, and what like another way of thinking about life looks like, which is essentially a Christian perspective. And so it's precisely people like you and me that will listen to all 36 hours of those lectures and be like, huh, yeah, I get what you're saying. Thanks for that.
There's so broadly, like I'm not a philosophical expert, but there's like this trend where like modernism tried to build something, right? And modernism set up all these systems of running society and culture. It was pretty monolithic. And then postmodernism was about deconstructing that, showing that the assumptions that held that together were assumptions and could be different. It was sort of like the non-Euclidean geometry revolution in geometry. And it was a movement of fluidity and liberation and and possibility. And that's like sort of the culture you see in a big city like I live in. It's like this culture of like freeing oneself from social constraint, like freeing myself from
Right.
traditional ideas about relationship and gender and anything that you can think of. Like it's like seeking absolute freedom. And I think the level beyond postmodernism, which Jordan Peterson is pointing to, is that like sometimes you have a better experience, like if you can bind yourself, if you can choose structure.
Definitely.
Like the revolution of of being able to critique inherited institutions like is important, but that's not all there is. And being able to bind yourself even to new institutions or even to old institutions. to make a choice to be a Christian or to be married to someone and treat that as something larger than yourself that's worth sticking to. Like these, maybe they lead you to higher optimum than if you can't do that, if you only can deconstruct. So that's like the level that I think he's pointing to, and I don't know that anybody is completely articulating it yet. David Chapman is my favorite internet writer. I think he's also pointing to something like that. The integral movement is trying to point to something like that. I think everybody, like, there's like this groundswell of people sort of reaching for structure.
Definitely. I think you're going to see more and more people trying to figure out how to interpret that space and how to construct lives and organizations and communities and cultures in that space. And I think what's going on really is, like, I think Jordan Peterson is a brilliant kind of example of one way to think about that space and to explore it and to occupy that space. But he's only one, and I think it's a massive space. I think the reason why Jordan Peterson has risen to such extraordinary fame and influence is just because that space was artificially evacuated, kind of suppressed, really, for the past several years, I think. And he just happens to have been the person who kind of had a long running and significant kind of intellectually hefty project that he had been working on for years and years. And he was the first one to just almost accidentally kind of break into that massive unexplored space that's kind of lacking in our culture. So of course, as he's the first one kind of to break through, he shoots to the top in terms of influence and reach because it's so evacuated. But now there's going to be more and more people filling out this massive space in all kinds of different, interesting, and creative ways that are going to be different depending on different people's temperaments and different shades of opinion and inclinations. And so, yeah, to me, that's like a huge bull market, and not in a kind of like instrumental sense. I mean, it's like there are spaces of social experience and intellectual reflection that have just been not being occupied. And now people are going to be occupying them more and more. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
And so I just want to, I'm mindful of our time, and I just want to finish out.
Oh, great.
My
Yeah,
religious
sure.
journey real
Wrap
quick.
us up, Jacob.
Tell people where I currently am.
Yeah, please.
I sort of not randomly, but I ran by an Orthodox monastery last year. And the abbot there was this really funny guy that used to be a Hare Krishna and a hippie in San Francisco, and then became an Orthodox monk. And he gave me a book, and from like the 1930s, by this Orthodox monk that like grew up in Russia in 1890s and like fled the Russian Revolution. And it was interesting characters. And the thing is, like, this book is written from this incredible mystical phenomenological perspective. Like, it is the most rich in living Christianity that I've ever encountered. Like, I cry like every 5 pages, like, reading this book. It's so beautiful.
Whoa. Cool.
And part of that is because I've really internalized the Christian narrative from like just growing up on it for 18 years. And it might not do the same for everybody, but there's like it is, and I keep on thinking, like for this writer, Archimandrite Sophrony, like exploring his relationship with God, part of the very fundamental nature of reality. Like, the name of God is I am, or I am that I am. And he's like, what is this I am? And it has something to do with the fundamental nature of reality. And the Bible says that God is love. And, and those two ideas, like, he's sort of like seeking God and having a deeply emotional experience in doing it. And it's incredibly mystical. And I'm like, okay, this is weird, but really cool. I love it. And it turns out that's like kind of just mainstream orthodoxy. Like orthodoxy is an incredibly mystical and like a religion, and it happens to be like the Church of the Apostles and known for being super conservative and like really old. And I'm like who's been hiding this from me like all these years? So like the last 3 or 4 months, I've just been really geeking on orthodoxy and really loving it. It's
that's awesome. It's something
really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
The name of the book.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is, the name of that book was His Life Is Mine. it's like it is mind bending. If you have some Christian background, I do recommend picking it up. I bought a bunch of the copies though, so there's not that many copies left on Amazon. I'm sorry.
No, it's really interesting. It's something I don't know enough about at all. I haven't read much about it. You've told me a little bit about it before, but you definitely are encouraging me to look more into it. It sounds interesting. What was I going to say? And yeah, I definitely think you're going to see more and more people exploring more and more versions of, yeah, more kind of strict, traditionalist, kind of self-imposed forms of intellectual and social and behavioral structure. So, yeah, that's cool that that's kind of the little niche that you find yourself kind of most drawn to. Is this something that you're exploring? I should say before we go in just a minute, you should plug your stuff a little bit. You write a blog, and you also are you still doing your podcast?
Yeah, I'm actually going to drop an episode today. My podcast is non-political, so I kind of enjoyed the opportunity to bat around some political ideas with you, Justin, because I don't get to talk about them very much.
Are you writing and talking more about like this orthodoxy kick you're on?
I plan to.
Cool.
I haven't been very good at producing content outside of my podcast lately. So, talking with people in conversation is really the thing that I can keep up with, even if I haven't really made space in my life to be in that mindset. Writing is something that I really need to be in the mood
Yeah,
for.
it's hard. It's always a struggle. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, my podcast is active. It's The Uncharted Life. So our projects have a little bit of an echo there in their name.
Right.
Other Life and Uncharted Life.
That's true.
And my podcast is about life philosophy and finding people living interesting lives and interviewing them. So the one I'm dropping today is with two people that work at the suicide hotline in San Francisco, where I also volunteer. And we talk about what that's like. And that kind of gives you a flavor for the kind of topics that I talk about. I've interviewed a friend of mine who's a priest or a pastor, a friend of mine who raises two children with autism, those kind of topics. Just trying to find the niches of human life that most people don't have a window into, and opening that up.
Right. Well, I think that's a beautiful thing, and I think you have a unique kind of trajectory, and you have a unique history, and your own politics and philosophical beliefs or convictions, or even just inclinations, are a unique brew. And
I really want to build bridges.
Okay.
And if I'm gonna like leave the audience with something, it's like, I don't know, build a bridge. Like, it's like there's value in a lot of different cultural pockets, and
yeah,
I think building bridges between them helps build empathy, and I think that's the connective tissue that'll keep us from killing each other. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
And I think that's a worthwhile project.
Well, that's cool, man. Thanks for kind of summarizing it in that way. I appreciate that. And I would just add to your own modest description of yourself. I would say that you have a very unique blend of perspectives and convictions and inclinations, and I think people with unique blends of viewpoints are some of the kind of key actors, I think, right now in opening up the culture to be more multidimensional. And so you see that in terms of building bridges, which is totally fine, and that's a beautiful thing. I actually tend to not see the larger politics in that way personally. I tend to see it as, I'm very interested in things like exit and increasing kind of multidimensionality, increasing options, increasing possibilities for divergence, but productive and creative and constructive divergence, really. And so, I think when people like you blog and do podcasts, even though, as you said yourself, very modestly, you're not famous. Like, I'm not famous either. We don't have like huge audiences, but if you have things that you believe in that are interesting and that don't map on easily to what other people think or believe, the work that you do it's important, and people like you, and people like me, like small scale people who are just have interesting, weird thoughts and want to build them out and want to explore and create new niches of life, of culture. I applaud that tremendously, and I see you as an example of that. And yeah, I just want to say that's awesome, man. You have nothing but my encouragement and support for you to carve out your like weird blend of Orthodox Christianity and leftism and rightism and libertarian tech broism and also like sensitive, vulnerable, non-toxic masculinity that I think you also kind of represent. I appreciate those things about you.
Bitcoin and love is a cool combination.
Yeah. So I hate that I have to run so quick, but I do. So
I enjoyed this, Justin. I hope we could do something a little longer someday.
Yeah, definitely. We'll just as soon as we have some time, we'll just do it again.
All right. Well, peace. Enjoy your day over there in England.
Thanks for joining me, Jacob, and I'll be in touch with you.
All right.
See you, dude.